Hey everyone, it's Nikki Shelton, and I am keeping it real. My partner in crime, Carrie Selby, is actually off today, so you just get me flying solo. So hopefully this will be informative, and I can cover everything I want to cover in a short amount of time. So today we're going to be talking about we talked last week, actually, I should say, starting out that way. We did kind of start about we talked about some big news that was breaking into for the VA buyers. So we're going to look at that and some new news that came into the scene. So make sure though, because I'm kind of bringing something else into it at the end of this broadcast. So make sure you hang out and watch because I would love to get some of your opinions and see what your thoughts are on this. So here we go. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and, like I said, we've got some really big news starting off in the real estate industry. And then it's been the last 2 weeks we've gotten, especially, all over for the original one, and then here in Washington for our second one. But it kind of reaches all over. So I just thought I'd kind of bring it all in. So if you remember, about 10 months ago, I did a broadcast about the NAR lawsuit that was going on and its potential outcomes and its potential and how it could be damaging to some buyers. And that was especially to what I said is our first time home buyers and our VA. The reasoning of what I said behind that was because for instance, with first time home buyers, a lot of them have credit, but not the cash. I mean, it's getting, it's getting your closing costs, it's getting your down payment, it's getting now a buyer broker fee, possibly. That's negotiable, but that could be a possibility that you could have to pay that. So it can end up being a pretty big sum of money, and most people just don't have that, especially when they're just starting off and going out. The VA buyers are a little different because they have different restrictions than some of the other loans. For instance, they cannot pay any buyer closing costs. So we're going to go ahead and dive in and talk about this ban that was announced last week. So let's go ahead and talk about this a little bit. So the VA Deputy Director of Policy, Michelle Corden, announced last week that in June, the VA was planning a temporary ban on VA buyers directly paying for professional real estate representation. Again, this is a temporary ban of the requirement. So it's kind of big news. According to Annie sorry about that. But why is this important? I guess I'm sorry, is what I wanted to say. And it's because, like, the reason that these requirements were put in place originally was to protect our VA buyers. And so not having them having to pay that, or not allowing them to pay the buyer broker fee, that was a benefit to them. But recently, because of this NAR lawsuit, it's actually putting in them at a disadvantage. And so this is why, like I said, they cannot be charged for a brokerage fee or commission in connection of any real estate services. The result is put the VA buyers at a disadvantage by forcing them to either forego the representation because they simply can't afford it, and they're saying, okay, then I'll just represent myself. And if you bought your first house, you probably can, remember back and, like, I didn't know how to make sure that inspection got done. I didn't know about the septic, the well, all these things that you have to know about, especially, if you're a first time home buyer. But even as seasoned home buyers, there's things that come up that, most of us real estate people have experience with that we can, or, find out about or whatever. But it's putting them at a disadvantage because some of them are just saying, I just don't want representation because I've got to have that money to do other things. I can't afford to pay for the broker services. It's also allowed them to not have competitive offers. So what I mean here is, you have another person who can't pay for it. So it's going to put them at a disadvantage because they can't pay for it. They just can't do it. They've also might choose a different type of loan. Like, at VA buyers, they get a 0% down payment for their, appreciation for their services. But if they have to go to a FHA or a conventional loan, then they're looking at more costs as far as a down payment. And so they might be looking at a less favorable loan, or else they just don't buy at all. So the next question is, so this was kind of, this was a temporary ban. Again, we don't know how long. And the question is, how will they do this? We really haven't been given that information. This is a temporary ban until they deem it necessary to engage in a formal rulemaking process. So the NAR is actually still, although it's been settled, it's still not decided. So there could be a lot of other things that come up between now and the time that this is done, different people talking about it or different groups, that they'll listen to. There's a great YouTube video by Annie Fitzsimmons on this very topic, and a lot of what she covers I'm bringing up into this coming up forward. So, but check it out if you want some more information. Okay, so the second big news here has to do with the Pacific Northwest. And yesterday, the Northwest MLS, and that's here our local MLS for like the Seattle, King County, Kitsap areas, they announced that they will not opt into this lawsuit. And that's kind of a big thing, because most of the brokerages and a lot of the other organizations out there have been opting in, but they've chosen not to. And I was kind of like not surprised, because, well, let's go forward and we'll talk about why. Because there were three things, according to Annie Fitzsimmons. She's our legal hotline expert for our Association of Realtors here, or for MLS. And what she has said is that there was three items that were really, really super important in this lawsuit. And one of them has to do with having a buyer broker agency. So in other words, before we can even go out and show a property this time, we have to have that buyer broker agency signed. That was one of the first components of this lawsuit. The second one is that the brokers must be, the agreement from sellers to pay the compensation to brokers must be negotiated in a decoupled agreement. Okay. What that means is that the seller can offer compensation to the listing brokers and their firm, and they can offer it to the other side. But they can't be combined. It can't be like, we're going to give this to you and then you can give this to the other side. So it has to be two separate offers of compensation. And the seller does not have to offer any compensation to the other side if they don't want. They'll obviously have to pay their broker, but they don't have to do that. And so that was really setting those limits as far as that the seller has control on how that is being split and what the situation is with that. And honestly, I agree with that. I think that, in the past, especially like this crazy market that we just came out of where, people were offering their first child kind of thing. I think the seller should have had some rights to make that decision and really do that. And honestly, in my opinion, I think they really have. We all negotiate our commissions almost on a daily basis. So I don't think that they weren't allowed to do it. The basis of this lawsuit, that's what it says. So, but they don't have to pay commission. Anyway, the last thing was, and this is really new to everybody, is that they are prohibiting the NAR MLSs are being prohibited from publishing any seller offer of buyer broker compensation. That one I think is going to be a little strange. We'll talk about this in a minute. So we're going to, again, hold off until the end, because I'm going to show you a couple of other places and we're going to talk about it. And it's just a little different and a different kind of thought process. So let's move on. Okay. All right. So let's look at what our local Northwest MLS has been doing. And they've actually put out like I said, they've kind of put out the statement to all the brokers and stuff here just recently, and you can look it up, and it's on the web. So it's not like anything hidden or anything like that. But they've been working in the past couple of years, as you can see. In 2019, they eliminated the requirement that the seller offer compensation to the buyer broker. They said, you know what, seller, you don't have to do that. You shouldn't have to do that. That was in 2019 that they put that out to our brokers, saying that you don't have to do that. You can offer whatever you want for compensation. In 2022, they decoupled broker compensation. So again, that meant that the seller chooses to offer one side one thing, and they can choose to offer the buyer broker something or not at all or whatever. So they made sure that they were completely separate. They weren't like, you're going to put down this amount and then you can give them a part of it kind of thing. It was like, no, This is your side, and this is your side if they wanted to do anything at all. And it's really predominantly stated on the purchase and sale, which I thought was super cool, because it's like when you look at this, you can say, oh, this aligns with what I'm supposed to be, like the buyer can say, this is aligning with the offer of compensation if there was any, but that aligns with what I told my buyer broker I'd pay them. And it was very clear and very fast to see. So I think it was very transparent, and it was helpful to all parties because you could see exactly what was offered. Or if you're negotiating on it, you could have that opportunity to do that too. Saying it's not enough, I need to ask for more, and we're willing to do this, to do that, to make that happen. So those were kind of different. In the beginning of this year, the new law required that they have to have the written broker agency agreement. So in other words, I cannot go out and I cannot show any properties unless I have that signed. It has to be at the very, very beginning. So that was kind of some cool stuff. Okay. So that's what the MLS has been working on. And so it didn't really surprise me. Like I said, I mean, out of the, the three kind of parts of the lawsuit, it was kind of like we have two of them covered, and the third one is we implement the beginning this year. So the other one was, though, about, like I said, it's kind of more about the MLS and putting that compensation in there. So again, I mentioned that there was a statement put out by our Northwest MLS. And I kind of find it kind of interesting on how the different places are looking at it. And I'll get to that in a second. But this one says, NAR's removal of compensation transparency from the MLS pushes consumers and brokers to make secret deals off the MLS, inviting deceptive practices, discrimination, and unfair housing, depriving buyers of information about the transaction, risks harming buyers, especially those buyers who are already disadvantaged, including first-time home buyers and members of protected classes. Of course, prohibiting offers of compensation in the MLS also unnecessarily restrains the seller's choice and absolute right to offer compensation to a brokerage firm representing the buyer. Okay, that was a lot. But let's look at it for just really quick, okay? So the reason that I'm understanding from my MLS and that letter that I received from them and the announcement that they put out is saying that we've been very transparent. I mean, we think it's important to have that information in the MLS. That's why we're opting out, or I should say not opting in. But it's because they're trying to be as transparent as possible. They want to have all sides, the information. They were saying, like it could hurt the other parties, the ones who like first-time home buyers, and again, the people who just don't have those kinds of funds. They can qualify for credit-wise, but they don't necessarily have those funds that magnitude sitting around, and it's putting them at a disadvantage. And that really, whether it's a VA person who doesn't have the option to do that, a first-time home buyer, not knowing what that compensation or what the seller's willing to do, it really puts them in disadvantage because, obviously they're going to need that. So they're saying it's not good. And then the other part of that too was the seller's choice, because if the seller's offering something as an incentive to the buyer to purchase their home, why take that choice away from the seller? So interesting kind of thing interesting way to look at that. Okay. So I'm also part of the Iowa Association of Realtors, and I don't have my Iowa license, but their MLS that's in that area, it includes Nebraska, Iowa, and South Dakota. So I actually have access to their MLS, but I'm not part of the Iowa, just want to say. But I did want to bring up what they are saying, and they're pretty similar in my opinion. They passed a new bill, and it's called the Real Estate Transparency Act. And it really has kind of 5 different components. You have to have a signed broker's agreement. The compensation is supposed to be transparent. It's negotiable. It's not mandatory. It's not set by law. It can be paid out of the seller's proceeds. Okay. They usually are, but at least here in Washington. So that one kind of was like, okay. And then you have your role of what a licensee is supposed to be doing for their buyer or seller. Okay, so it kind of explains like, okay, this is like, we have a agency pamphlet that explains like what the different roles are as a licensee can take, and that one just kind of reiterate that. So pretty similar. I mean, I didn't really see anything like, oh, that's kind of interesting or whatever. I mean, it just kind of like the Washington one, a little worded, a little different, but let's be more transparent. Let's be more out there. So kind of the similar. And really, I don't think they put anything in there about that you can't, how it's, or how the MLS is going to handle it. Okay, then I went and I looked at the Nebraska one because, I mean, I am a real estate broker in Nebraska, so I'm interested in what they're having to do too. So I didn't really go much further than that, just because I'm not as involved in those and other areas and stuff as I am. But I wanted to kind of talk about this one a lot. So the main thing is that they're going to prohibit the conveying of compensation offers in the MLS, noting that realtors have long believed that making compensation offers is in the interest of the sellers, buyers, and brokers. Yeah, it is. You have to do that. Compensation offers are still an option that consumers pursue off MLS through direct negotiation and consultation with a real estate professional. Sellers can continue to offer compensation for buyer broker services, but such offers cannot be communicated through the MLS. So theirs is completely like, we shouldn't put in the MLS, we should talk outside of it. Regardless of how it works out, you're going to have a written agreement between the parties. So it's not going to be, I mean, you can't just do like a back thing. You have to have a conversation and have it written down. But anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. The compensation available for buyer brokers continues to be negotiated and will always result from negotiations between listing brokers and the consumers they serve. Compensation can be any off MLS negotiated arrangement and may take multiple forms: a fixed fee commission paid directly by consumer, concession from the seller, or a portion of the listing broker compensation. The seller can continue to offer buyer concessions on an MLS. For example, they can put closing costs down. So they can put their closing costs down into the MLS, but they can't put the compensation. Let's come back to that. And then the last one, number 2, okay, was that they have to have a buyer broker's agency agreement. Okay. Let's go back to that though. That was really kind of interesting because Nebraska's take on it, or the Omaha Area Board of Realtors, what they put out. This is, again, you can go pull it up on the internet. They were saying, yeah, just talk about it outside of it. You know what? I don't know. I mean, I think if it was me, I was selling or buying a house, I don't know if I would want my brokers just to be talking about it and not being really transparent about it. I don't know. I have a weird feeling about that one. I just don't know. So, anyway, it's a little interesting. And, you know, I mean, you always have times when you're negotiating where, you know, like you have to write a contract, which can take hours sometimes. So, but there, you know, and there might be times where you pick up the phone and say, okay, hey, you know, other broker, my client's trying, they want to offer this, but we need this, and we have to, you know, we really want to do by this date, and can your sellers do this? Can we make this happen? And you're kind of talking and putting it together. So that does happen. I mean, that happens in Washington. It happens everywhere. I don't think that's going to change, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about, like, it's nice. I think it would be nice for a buyer to know when they walk in the door, look at a property, I should say, and saying, you know, I know that my compensation that I'm paying my buyer broker is going to be this amount of money. And they're willing to do that. So somehow I need to figure out how we're going to negotiate this to make this make sense and make it work out. I think it just is a little bit more transparent, and it's not so kind of behind the scenes and stuff. I mean, at least the initial, you know, once you kind of figure that out with your buyer and and the sellers already kind of know what they want to do, then you talk it out and you come up with, negotiate it out and how you're doing it. So I don't know, guys. And the fact that they're going to put the sellers concessions in there, we don't do that here in Washington. I mean, our concessions they're negotiated as part of the contract, as part of the loan sometimes. Um, you know, I don't know. We just don't like, hey, seller's going to pay this. I mean, if you're going to do that, why not say, hey, sellers are going to pay for this amount for the prior broker fees? It doesn't make sense to me. So anyway, that's what I have for you guys today. I know I'd love to hear what your opinions are. Go ahead and shoot me some questions, because there was a lot of topics. I mean, a lot of information in that. But it's been really fascinating. It was really fascinating learning about the other MLSs and how they're handling it. And it depends on if it's a member owned or if it's an NAR MLS, on how things are kind of working out too. But just it's interesting to see that. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Please throw them out there. I would love to see what we can come up with. And it's been fun being here today. And we'll see you next week. And Carrie shall be back. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you hit that like, subscribe, and follow button, and we will catch you guys next week. Thanks for joining us.